Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how I make my gluten-free pumpkin cheesecake. It's one of my favorite holiday pies, although I'll eat it any time of year. But if you like cheesecake and you like pumpkin pie, this is the perfect combination of both. And really not very many ingredients to make it either. But as with most cheesecakes, you want to make it the day before. It really needs to sit overnight in the fridge and set up completely before serving. So plan ahead, make it the day before. So first up, what we're gonna do for the crust. These are my gluten-free ginger snaps. I'll give you a link to that video and that recipe in the description box. You need about 20 to 30, depending on how big you made your cookies. We need a total of 3 cups of cookie crumbs for the crust. Whenever I make ginger snap cookies, I usually do a double batch, and then I put half of them in the freezer, and then they're ready for desserts like this. You could even crumble them up in the food processor and freeze them that way too, and then they're even more ready for your crust, which is what I usually do. And they're pretty soft, but I've let them sit out overnight to kind of dry out a little bit. So what I'm going to do first is put some in my food processor, make crumbs, and then measure out and see how much I've got. If you don't have a food processor, you could just put these in a Ziploc bag and kind of crumble them up. And I mentioned when you make these, if you want a crunchier cookie, just bake them a little bit longer. And I'm just breaking them up just a little bit to give the food processor a head start. And if you don't like ginger snap cookies, you could use a gluten-free graham cracker cookie for this crust as well. Or even just a regular pie crust and not do it in a springform pan. Or if you have another kind of cookie or crust that is your favorite. And I should mention my oven is preheated to 350. I've lightly greased my 9-inch springform pan, so it's ready to go. And a foil-lined cookie sheet. Sometimes, depending on how much butter is in your crust, it will drip out through the bottom. So I always put this on a foil-lined sheet. So that's ready, the oven's ready. Let's get our crust ready. I need another bowl. Put your cookies in a different bowl. Bring everything a little bit closer. And I'm just going to start measuring out till I get 3 cups of my crumbs. And you can see, even as soft as they are, they crumble up really nicely. Exactly 3 cups into our bowl. And all of these that we made a mess with, put those in your bowl too. So 16 cookies of this size will give you 3 cups of crumbs. To our crumbs, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of melted butter. And I know it doesn't seem like very much butter for just 3 cups, but you notice how soft my cookies were. It won't take very much to bring them together and then put them in our pan and make a nice crust. So just pour in your butter. You want to get all of the butter. And just mix it around till it kind of comes together. It'll be kind of hard to tell because they are the same color with or without the melted butter in there. If you lightly press it with your spoon against the side of your bowl, just to see how well it's kind of sticking together, you'll know if you need more butter or not. And this is looking pretty good. If your cookie crumb mixture looks a little bit dry, add a little bit of melted butter, just a little bit at a time until you get the consistency that you want. And with this particular cookie crust, the more butter that you add, you might think that you need more butter to make it stick together in here, but it will make for a really greasy crust once you put it in your pan and you bake it. And you'll notice that it will get kind of soggy with all that extra butter. These cookies were already kind of soft, and with just this little bit of butter and then we pack them in, it will make the crust that you want. So bring over your pan, and I'm just gonna dump all of my cookie crumbs in. And just level it out, give it a shake. And I just have a glass. This is the perfect kind of glass because it's straight-sided and flat-bottomed to press in our crust. And with your glass, just start pressing. I kind of start in the middle. You could build up the sides if you want to, but I like this cheesecake with just a flat crust. If you feel like one side has a little bit too much, just use your spoon and spread it out. And I don't mind that the sides have a little bit of crumbs. It's fine. But I just make sure it's all packed in and as even as you can get it. It's kind of hard to tell, but do your best. And you can see how easy it is with a tall glass like this that you can really press it down in there. So crust is ready to go. Set this aside. So now for the main pumpkin cheesecake part. I have an 8-ounce package of cream cheese, and it's pretty soft room temperature. And I'm going to use a hand mixer today. You could do this with a whisk and use your muscles, but hand mixer makes it go fast and easy. Same spatula. And I'm just going to mix up this cream cheese till it's pretty smooth. Scrape down the bowl and mix a little bit more. I think I spend more time scraping bowls and spatulas than anything else. And I'm not going to scrape the bowl down just yet. So to my cream cheese, I'm going to add, I have 2/3 cup of honey. This recipe originally calls for equal amounts of white sugar and brown sugar, but honey and molasses is what I'm doing today. You could use coconut sugar or even maple syrup. The only thing I've noticed if you use maple syrup in this main batter part is maple syrup is a little bit more liquidy, and so your cheesecake will take longer to bake. And even with the honey, it takes a little bit longer to bake than if you use sugar. And to my honey, 1 tablespoon of molasses. And I use the molasses to give it that little bit of a caramely flavor that brown sugar would. And just mix your honey, molasses, and cream cheese till they're really combined. Turning the bowl as you go. Scrape your bowl down. And keep mixing. And it's okay if there's a little bit of lumps of cream cheese in here. We still have a lot more mixing to do. I have 3 eggs I'm going to add in. You could go one at a time and mix after each addition. I'm not looking to mix in a lot of air with this batter. You just want it to be well mixed, but not adding a lot of extra volume. If you notice that your beaters have a lot of extra cream cheese up here at the top, try to get that off and put into your batter so it doesn't create lumps later. And scrape down your bowl. And I go across the bottom just to see what's happening. Now that we've got our eggs mixed in, I have 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Just throw that in. 1 cup of pumpkin and my spices. And I don't have very many spices, and there's not a lot of the spices that I'm using. If you're using a Gingersnap crust for this cheesecake, it already has a lot of flavor in the crust. So we don't need a whole lot of flavor in the filling. But if you like more, add more. So in this bowl, I have 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And just mix this. Really doesn't take very much. 1 cup of pumpkin. and give this a good mix. Again, you don't want to overmix this to create a lot of volume, but you want to mix in the pumpkin pretty good. And with your beaters on low, add in your 2/3 cup of heavy cream. And you might be thinking that this is too liquidy, but trust me, it works. If you were using white sugar and brown sugar, it would be a little bit less runny. But this is perfect, it's what we're looking for. And I was just making sure there's nothing stuck on the bottom. You don't want a big chunk of cream cheese that didn't get mixed in when you're pouring it in your pan. Bring over your pan, and I'm just gonna very carefully pour this in. We pack down our crust, so it shouldn't bubble up, but just be careful because this is a liquid and sometimes it does disrupt your crust. So this will go in my oven. We don't need to do a water bath, but just straight in the oven, 350. In about 20 minutes or so, I'm gonna turn it around in my oven, and then we wanna bake it until it's just barely wobbly in the middle. You'll notice it will take longer with honey or maple syrup in the filling. So instead of really relying on the time to determine the doneness, you wanna just make sure that it is just barely jiggly in the middle. While that's in the oven, I have a 3/4 cup of sour cream and 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. And we're just gonna mix these together. You could use a whisk, but a spatula works really good. And it's okay if you just took this out of the fridge. It's gonna sit here on the counter the whole time my cheesecake is baking. But make sure to mix that maple syrup in with that sour cream. You see it kind of turns it a brownish color. If you're using regular sugar, you would add brown sugar to this instead of the maple syrup. You could even use coconut sugar for this as well. But with brown sugar or coconut sugar, or maybe even date sugar or whatever kind of sugar you are going to add, you want it to be really dissolved in there. Maple syrup doesn't take very much to get mixed in. So set this aside. I'm gonna clean everything up, check on my cheesecake in about 20 minutes, flip it around in the oven, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's ready for the topping. I don't know if you could see that. It's just barely moving in the middle. And if you noticed around the edges, it's starting to crack a little bit. And that's fine, that's what it's supposed to do. And it went in the oven for about an hour and a half. And I turned it around a couple of times. And you might worry that it looks really soupy, but it does set up. I'm gonna let this cool. I don't know if you could see that it is a little puffed in the middle. I'm gonna let this cool for about 10 minutes. And then we'll add our topping on and then put it back in the oven for 10 more minutes. If you were to put the topping on right now, or if you put the topping on too soon, when you go to pour your topping on, it will make a hole and go into your cheesecake. So you want the top to be firm enough that it can hold the topping. My cheesecake has been cooling, and we can add on our topping now. Give your topping a good stir. You don't have to add this topping on. You could just leave it as is, cool it off, and just serve it with maybe some whipped cream. But this topping is really good. I'm just gonna very carefully pour this on. This topping will go in that crack a little bit, but that's okay. You'll see that my topping is not sinking in to the filling. And just very carefully spread this out. And I always start with a little bit of topping, and then I put the rest on. Just make sure you get your topping in an even layer. I don't know if you can see, but my cheesecake has pulled away from the sides of the pan. It does that when it's cooling off. Turn the pan if you need to. And I'm not going all the way to the edge. Make sure that you do kind of a nice looking design on top because it will show. But I didn't go all the way to the edge because I don't want this sour cream topping to go over the sides where it has pulled away from the side of the pan. So back in the oven for 10 more minutes. After we take it out of the oven and it cools off to room temperature, and then of course put it in the fridge overnight, it will sink back down in the middle. Those cracks will kind of go back together, even though there's a little bit of topping in the middle. It doesn't matter. Set your timer for 10 minutes, not 10 seconds. And you can see why I left a nice looking design, because it will show up a little bit. And it is a little puffed in the center, but that will sink back down once it cools off all the way. So let this cool off for at least 2 hours till it's room temperature. Wrap it really well in plastic wrap and stick it in the fridge overnight. For you, it's only been a few seconds, but for me, it's been all night. And my cheesecake, I just took it out of the fridge. And it should just come right out. Woo. Just like that. Very carefully. Let me bring it closer. And you can see it's not a very tall cheesecake, but you don't need a really big piece of this either, unless you're me, and you could eat the whole thing by yourself. So let's cut into it. And you want to clean your knife off in between. And if you drop your cheesecake accidentally, it's okay. Because you can see, after having been in the fridge all night, how firm it is. Don't drop your cheesecake. But it looks really good. Let's give it a bite. It's the perfect combination of pumpkin pie and cheesecake. And the crust isn't super crunchy, but it adds a lot of extra flavor, which it doesn't need. Even if you did just a regular pie crust or a graham cracker crust, whatever, it really has good flavor without the Gingersnap crust. But if you like Gingersnap cookies, it is perfect with this cheesecake. And the sour cream topping, it just adds just that little bit extra. You don't have to put this topping on. And you could save some of your cookies and crumble those on top if you wanted for some kind of decoration or design. A dollop of whipped cream, but it really doesn't need it, especially with this sour cream topping. One of my favorite desserts by far. And I might say that about a lot of my desserts, but I really do love this one. At least this one didn't fall on the floor. It just fell on top of itself. But that's what happens in the kitchen. Turn that around so you can see. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.